Hi, I'm JT Rose. Welcome to another edition of Block Talk. This week, we kick off a 4-part series on building applications with the new Azure Blockchain Service. I'm joined in the studio today by Jason Anderson from the Azure Blockchain Engineering team. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks, JT. Happy to be here.
So if you could tell the folks at home a little bit about what you do and what the team is working on.
Yeah, sure. So I work with a team of talented engineers and PMs, and over the last year or so, we've been hard at work in making blockchain networks a managed service in Azure Blockchain Service. Team is spread across the world, working literally 24 hours a day on the service, and we're excited to be here today at launch.
And having a big moment.
Big moment to build, absolutely.
Excellent. So I want to get into Azure Blockchain Service in this episode in particular, but maybe I can quickly tee up what we're going to talk about over the next few episodes. So there are really 3 key components to building an enterprise application on blockchain. And we've learned this over the last sort of year or two, building thousands of apps with customers using our Workbench tool. It starts with building and configuring and managing the underlying blockchain infrastructure. Once you have that solid foundation, on top of that, you need to be able to code the logic that you share with other organizations in the form of smart contracts. And then on top of that, you need to build an application that can interact with those smart contracts and send messages to and from that ledger network. So in Azure, what we've been working on and what we're introducing this week at Build is a set of offerings that can help you do these 3 things. The first at the bottom is Azure Blockchain Service. Helps you launch and create and launch and deploy and manage your underlying blockchain infrastructure. Once you have that solid foundation, and Jason's going to talk a little bit about the specifics of that service today, you can use new extensions for Visual Studio Code to author and test smart contracts, creating and compiling Solidity smart contracts, for example, deploying them either to a Consortium network in Azure Blockchain Service, to public Ethereum, or locally using tools like Truffle, Ganache. And then once that's set, you need to be able to build an application on top of that ledger network, write messages down to the ledger, and read messages off of it and route it to consuming applications and databases. With the Workbench tool, we allow you to do that very quickly in sort of when you're in prototyping phase, but we also have made the component pieces of Workbench available as part of the Azure Blockchain Dev Kit. And on our 3rd and 4th videos, we'll get into how to use that Dev Kit to interact with the ledger. Maybe we can start in this video with Azure Blockchain Service. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've built and why and what it does?
Sure. There's really 3 core things that Azure Blockchain Service addresses and provides value for customers. The first is simple network deployment and operation. So really, what does that mean? I call it PaaS goodness. One of the things that we're good at Microsoft with Azure are building fully managed services, whether it's SQL database, Azure Kubernetes service, etc. Azure Blockchain Service is just another one of those where we manage the underlying infrastructure on behalf of the customer. And I'll show you some of that as we get forward. The second one, which is really more unique to blockchain in and of itself, is this idea of building and managing a consortium. Because of the blockchain, you're not working with yourself. You're sharing data with others. It's a multi-party application.
Right.
Setting that up today is really, really challenging to do. There's a lot of DevOps associated with being able to wire multiple nodes together, manage the permissioning and governance controls to do that. Azure Blockchain Service has that functionality built in, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes.
Awesome.
The third thing is really around leveraging the strength of Azure, the development tools that we have that you just alluded to, Visual Studio Code, work we've done with partners such as Truffle, etc., to build an extensible end-to-end distributed set of applications in Azure on Azure Blockchain Service.
Right, because when you're building this application, it's an application that multiple organizations that may or may not trust one another are going to use to share both data and logic.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a pretty tall task to do in and of itself. And so the ability to work with tools tools like Visual Studio Code, Azure DevOps, connect consuming applications and databases that you already use today, you're not having to rework that part of your IT infrastructure, is a huge value proposition of Azure Blockchain Service. And so I'm excited to get into that in a little bit more detail.
Precisely. So
should we get into the demo in the Azure
I
Portal?
was going to just say that. Why don't we jump into the demo and take a look at it? Okay, so what you're seeing here is my Azure resource that's deployed in Azure Blockchain Service. It's called a member. Okay, and I've named this one Block Talk Member.
So this is for one organization.
This is for one organization,
Okay.
exactly. And what you'll see here is I have 2 validator nodes that are set up. I also have 2 transaction nodes that I'll show you as well that handle the functions of the network itself. So again, we're using the Quorum ledger, okay, which is an Ethereum-based ledger, permissioned blockchain network. I have a consortium that I've built called Block Talk. Okay, so I'll show you that in a couple of minutes, but let me just kind of show down here. We also have built-in deep metrics as well, and alerting that's built into the service itself. Whether it's how many blocks have been mined, how many transactions have been processed, pending transactions, handle requests, etc. This is all built through Azure Monitor Service, so I can actually go into metrics here, and I can do a bunch of other metrics as well. I can add in standard metrics for compute. So here's all the blockchain stuff, but I can also take a look at my CPU usage, my IOs written, memory usage, etc. So again, providing all that visibility to the customer around the resources they have and how they're being used, but you don't have to manage that infrastructure. Microsoft manages it for you.
Outstanding.
So let me go in and show you a little bit of view of transaction nodes.
Okay.
So a transaction node is used to be able to receive transactions on the network.
Okay.
I have 3 nodes that are set up right now. With Quorum, you have the ability to do private transactions, 2 specific nodes if you want. So I've got the public keys for those nodes, but I'm going to drill into just the default node, the Block Talk member node here. And you'll notice a couple of things. Number one, we use standard authentication mechanisms that are kind of standard in the market today for accessing these nodes. So basic authentication, which is effectively username and password, which is embedded inside of the URI that you'd use to access the node. We've also implemented access keys, so you can have rotating keys to be able to access a node. That we don't have to put a password in.
Sure.
You're using a key instead, but you can rotate that very easily. But in addition to that, one thing that I'm really excited about is that we've also integrated Azure Active Directory as an authentication mechanism to your transaction nodes. Okay. So what I've done here, or what the team has done, I should say, we've created a new role called the Blockchain Member Node Access Preview. If I go ahead and add that role to this particular node, not only could I add users or groups into that would have that access, right, but I could also add applications that are registered in Azure Active Directory, which is really, really powerful.
So if I'm building a supply chain consortium, this would be perhaps the CRM or ERP system of one of my downstream suppliers, and they want to be able to send transactions to the ledger from that app.
Exactly. And the beauty of that is you don't have to worry about then encoding effectively credentials into a URL to access the node.
Got it.
It's all done through Azure Active Directory, which makes it super simple.
Very cool.
So that's kind of the basics of the service in and of itself, as we talked about. Again, if I'm really to sum up what the 3 key things were that we talked about earlier, number one was just the PaaS goodness, and that's effectively what I just showed you. The fact that we provision the nodes, manage them for you, make it very easy to control and configure those nodes, right?
Right.
I didn't show you consortium management yet, right? So let me show you what that looks like.
Excellent.
I'm going to just switch over to that view really quick here. So as you can see here, I have a consortium that I've already built. Okay. It's got the member that we were looking at earlier, Block Talk member.
Right, this was us.
I have a second member in here as well. It's in the same subscription, just because I wanted something more than one to show during the demo. Okay. Right? But 2 members in the same subscription really doesn't make a lot of sense because, again, with a blockchain network, you're interacting with multiple parties, different Azure subscriptions, right?
Other organizations outside of your own.
Exactly, right? Gotcha. So why don't we go ahead and just add another Azure subscription here right now so we can see what that looks like, right? So I'm going to click on invite here. I have to enter my member password here. So what is this? So really quick, when you provision a blockchain member in Azure Blockchain Service, we create an Ethereum account for you on the back end and create an Ethereum address. You then encrypt that address with a passphrase like you would normally do today. That's that passphrase. So all of the consortium management functionality that we enable in Azure Blockchain Service are backed by Solidity-based governance contracts. We're not inventing anything new here. Great. We're effectively providing an abstraction layer between those smart contracts for governance up through an API so that you can access it via the portal, you can access it via PowerShell. If you wanted to go down and change those smart contracts for consortium management, you can do that, but the goal here is to really make it super simple for most customers.
Right, so this is sort of a codeless interaction with the network.
Exactly. So I'm going to paste in my password here. And so now what I can do is I can enter in an Azure subscription ID. I'm going to enter in my Visual Studio subscription ID here. Okay. And I'm going to make this guy a member. So there's basically two roles in Azure Blockchain Service from a consortium management perspective, an admin and a member.
Right.
An admin can do all the things that I'm showing you here. They can add other members. They can remove other members. They would be the ones who could change the governance policy of the consortium itself, whereas a standalone member just participates.
Right. So a lot of the experience that we've had here is that often this role is played by a system integrator or perhaps an anchor customer that's building the application for their entire supply chain, for example.
Exactly. Right.
Cool.
So what you'll see here is that new subscription has been invited. They're in invited status. So let me go ahead and now switch over real quickly, and I'll show you what it looks like on my Visual Studio subscription. So you can see here, this is my personal subscription. I don't have any blockchain resources that are provisioned at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. And I'm going to pick the right subscription that I want to use. I'm going to pop it into an existing resource group I have, and there you go. Under Consortium, you can see that Block Talk is now showing up. So I could complete this out and provision it, but it takes about 10 minutes, so I won't do that. But the point being, we really are aiming to just make it very easy to get started, not only for an operating consortium, but even for developers who want to come in and just play with the service. This makes it really simple to do that.
Very cool. So in this episode, what we've covered is the creation, the configuration, the deployment of the underlying blockchain infrastructure with Azure Blockchain Service, and highlighted a bit of the consortium management and governance that's built into the tool that covers common consortium management tasks that we've seen in our experience with customers. In the next few episodes, we're going to build on that base. We're going to have Cale Teeter from our Azure Blockchain engineering team come in and show how you can start to codify your business logic in the form of smart contracts that would live on this ledger network, and then interact with those smart contracts using serverless tools like logic apps and functions that are available in the Azure Blockchain Dev Kit to write messages down to that ledger network and read messages off of it. I'd encourage you to follow us on Channel 9 and YouTube to follow along in this series. And we're also very active on Twitter, so give us a follow at MSFT Blockchain. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.